through the eyes of the victim, Linda. The sunny July day in California literally burns the skin, and the scorching asphalt underfoot feels unbearably hot. I just got out of summer school, sighing heavily at the thought of the long walk home. In the morning, my music teacher kindly gave me a ride to class, but now I have to walk back alone. I called home, but my mom was too busy sewing. I am not mad at her at all, but walking in this heat is so exhausting, and the backpack stuffed with textbooks painfully pulls at my shoulders. At the intersection near my favorite neighborhood, Corona Del Mar, I notice an old turquoise van parked nearby, which suddenly starts driving slowly right behind me. The young driver with curly hair smiles friendly, rolls down his window, and says he knows my parents very well, offering me a ride home so I wouldn't suffer under this blazing sun. I have always been a shy, quiet, and obedient girl, and this man does not look like a villain from scary fairy tales at all. He has such a calm voice and confident, welcoming manners. The inside of the van smelled of dampness and something elusively metallic, but the stranger smiled at me so kindly that I ignored my childhood instinct of self-preservation. With a sense of relief, I sit in the passenger seat, and the metal door slams behind me with a dull, heavy clank, instantly cutting off the familiar noise of the street. The car pulls away smoothly, but instead of turning towards my home on the familiar street, we are for some reason driving in a completely different direction, towards the desolate wastelands of the bay. My heart starts beating faster, my palms treacherously sweat, and I timidly, with a trembling voice, ask where we are going, but his friendly smile suddenly vanishes without a trace. This man's gaze becomes icy, empty, and foreign, and his heavy, rough hand tightly grips my shoulder, causing sharp pain and preventing me from moving. Fear constricts my throat like a sticky, suffocating web. I want to scream with all my might, call for my mom, say that I promise to return soon, but only a quiet, choked gasp escapes my chest. Through the eyes of the mother, Barbara, my hands are shaking so badly that I can't even button the tiny button on my cardigan, while dozens of police officers with flashlights search our dark street. I replay yesterday's brief phone call in my head over and over again, which now sounds in my ears like a personal, endless, and cruel death sentence. My girl called me from the school office, asked me to pick her up in the car, and I irritably replied that I was too caught up in my new dress sewing project, and told her to just walk. If only I had known that it would be our last conversation. If only I could rewind ruthless time, I would have dropped everything in the world and rushed to get her that very second. All night long, my husband Richard and I, maddened with grief and panic, drove around the neighborhood, shouting her name into the dark, but only the muffled sound of the night ocean answered us. Now my living room is full of strangers in strict uniforms, asking endless, hurtful questions to which I have no answers, while Richard sits on the couch, his head in his hands, rocking quietly. When the next morning, an officer with a darkened, haggard face crosses the threshold of our home and takes off his cap, I immediately know from his eyes, without words, that my little, kind girl is gone. They found her in the wild thickets of Back Bay, and this realization crashes down on me with unbearable, suffocating physical pain that instantly tears my chest apart. I thought I would lose my mind that day, but I didn't even suspect that decades of torture lay ahead of me, and and that phone call would ring in my head every single day. I called the police. I begged the detectives. I cried into the receiver, hoping to hear at least one clue, at least one name. But the response was always only silence and sympathetic, helpless sighs. I lived with this corrosive guilt for the rest of my life, watching my husband Richard turn gray and wither, watching old age take our strength, and our family forever remaining broken by that July tragedy. With each passing year, my health faded, and by the early 2000s, I had turned into a deeply grief-stricken, frail old woman whose body was failing, but whose memory of that fatal mistake remained as sharp as a razor. When I closed my eyes forever in 2005, having lived a long life and reached old age, my very last thought was a plea for forgiveness. I died without ever learning the name of the monster who destroyed our lives, taking this gaping, unhealing wound of a mother's guilt with me to the grave. Through the eyes of the father, Richard, I am a simple blue-collar worker, a machinist, a man used to solving problems with his own hands and protecting his family at any cost. But when my little girl was found strangled in the thickets of Back Bay, I realized for the first time in my life my absolute humiliating powerlessness. Every day for 35 years, I woke up with a single goal: to find the bastard in the turquoise van and make him pay for what he did. I realized with rage that while we spent years combing ditches and woods, this monster calmly grew old, watched TV, and babysat his own grandchildren. I haunted the doorstep of the Newport Beach police station. I watched young investigators turn gray, retire, and be replaced by new ones. But my daughter's case file continued gathering dust in the archives. I saw how this grief was slowly, piece by piece, killing my beloved wife Barbara. How she blamed herself for that wretched dress she was sewing that day. When I buried Barbara in 2005, already a frail old man with trembling hands, I stood at her grave and wept out of helpless rage. We were never able to achieve justice for our child. I survived my wife by only 3 years, sitting day after day in a chair in our empty house, feeling my own old body fail and waiting for a call from a detective who would say, "We found him, Richard." But that call never came. I passed away quietly in 2008 in deep old age, a tired, physically broken man, never knowing the truth and never living to see the retribution that seemed it would never come. Through the eyes of the friend, Janine, I'm sitting in the back seat of my mom's car. We slowly drive through the intersection of Marguerite Avenue, and I carelessly look out the open window at the sun-drenched streets. Suddenly, on the side of the road, I spot a familiar figure with a backpack. It's my friend. She is standing next to a large turquoise van, talking to the driver. I joyfully wave to her through the glass, confident that it's just one of her neighbors or family friends giving her a ride after a hard day of school. The man behind the wheel looks completely ordinary. There is no threat in his posture, and my mom also briefly notices them, but we just drive past, hurrying about our business. Who could have thought that a regular street scene in a quiet, safe neighborhood held an absolutely unimaginable, primal nightmare? The next day, when they show her photo on TV, and the anchor reports a terrible discovery in the bay with an alarmed voice, my world collapses. That turquoise van, that curly-haired man. The realization that I was literally a few meters away from her in those fatal minutes pierces right through me. All my life, I will ask myself the same maddening question. What if we had stopped to chat? What if my mom had honked? That fleeting glance through the car window will forever remain the most terrifying memory in my life, a scar that will never heal. Through the eyes of the perpetrator, James Allen Neal. More than 45 years have passed since that hot summer day in 1973, and my life has long settled into a quiet, measured, and peaceful routine. In the 70s, I was an ordinary construction worker named James Albert Layton, but after that incident in Newport Beach, I knew I had to cover my tracks. I changed my name to James Allen Neal, moved to Florida, and then settled here in Colorado, creating the perfect cover story. I'm in my 70s now, living in a beautiful house, raising wonderful grandchildren, watering my green lawn on weekends, and kindly greeting my neighbors who consider me an absolutely normal, sweet old man. My dark, filthy past, including those episodes of abuse in Riverside in the 90s, has been safely buried so deep that I myself sincerely believed in my invulnerability. All these long decades, I lived with a pleasant, soul-warming feeling of absolute impunity and superiority, knowing for sure that the police had never found a single clue. They were too stupid, and forensics of those years was too primitive to link that old turquoise van to me. My adult physical strength allowed me to control this situation with one simple movement. To me, she was nothing more than a broken doll in my hands. On that February morning in 2019, I am sitting casually in my cozy armchair, drinking my morning coffee and watching the news, when suddenly a loud, demanding, and harsh knock sounds at my front door. I open the door in irritation and see people in FBI jackets and California detectives on my porch, their stone faces expressing nothing but cold, professional contempt, when they clearly and loudly pronounce the name Linda O'Keefe. The concrete floor literally falls out from under my feet, and my old heart skips an agonizing beat from chilling animal terror. How could they know? How could they find me half a century later, when all the witnesses had long grown old and any evidence should have turned to dust? They forcefully twist my arms behind my back and place cold steel handcuffs on my old, wrinkled wrists. At this moment, I realize with crystal clarity that my perfect facade of a respectable family man, meticulously crafted over decades, has just crumbled, crushed by technologies I didn't even suspect existed. Through the eyes of the investigator, this case lay in our archives as a heavy, dead weight for 45 long years, hanging over the department like an unfulfilled promise to a brutally murdered girl. The folder was handed down to every new detective as a sacred duty, but generations came and went, and there were no answers. The hardest part was knowing that Linda's parents, Richard and Barbara, had passed away in the 2000s without ever seeing justice. Their pain and their deaths without answers burned us from the inside. We digitized every shred of evidence, uploaded the killer's extracted DNA profile to the national database back in 2001. But the soulless computer stubbornly reported no matches. In 2018, out of desperation, we launched a Twitter campaign in Linda's own voice to stir up the public, and simultaneously took an unprecedented step. We decided to use public genealogical databases, the very sites where ordinary people upload their tests just to find distant relatives or learn their ancestry. It was exhausting, painstaking, truly surgical work. Our analysts spent months building complex family trees, looking for common ancestors, filtering out hundreds of names until they hit the specific branch we needed. Ultimately, the circle of suspects narrowed down to a single person, a construction worker who had lived in Orange County many years ago, drove a similar van, and then abruptly changed his name and vanished without a trace. We set up round-the-clock covert surveillance on him in Colorado, patiently waited until he threw his coffee cup in the trash, and carefully retrieved this sample for the final, decisive comparison. When the lab sent the report and confirmed an absolute 100% match, the department fell into that ringing, dead silence that only happens in moments of the greatest historic triumph of justice. It's a pity that Richard and Barbara didn't live to see this day. But we came for him right at his home, in his cozy nest, and you should have seen his wide, shock-filled eyes. The eyes of an aging predator who was absolutely certain he had outsmarted time and the system forever.
Setting emotions aside, let's look at the dry facts of this unprecedented investigation, which will forever go down in the history of American criminology. 11-year-old Linda O'Keefe was abducted and brutally murdered on July 6, 1973, in the coastal city of Newport Beach, California. The killer turned out to be James Albert Layton Jr., who later changed his name to James Allen Neal and lived an absolutely unremarkable life as an ordinary citizen for decades, working on construction sites and raising a family. He was finally identified in February 2019 thanks to a massive breakthrough in genetic genealogy when DNA from the victim's clothing was linked to his distant relatives. Police arrested the 72-year-old Neal in Colorado, and during the investigation it was revealed that he also faced serious charges of child abuse in Riverside in the 1990s. Unfortunately, Linda's parents passed away long before his capture, and James Allen Neal himself never faced trial. He died in a prison hospital in July 2020 from a prolonged illness without ever hearing the official verdict of the jury. Take a deep breath, exhale the built-up tension, and let's try to comprehend the layered psychology of this tragedy that affected the lives of so many people. The case of James Neal demonstrates the frightening, almost supernatural ability of the human psyche to totally repress and normalize its own monstrous actions. In order to wake up in the morning, live a normal life, raise their own children, and genuinely smile at neighbors, the perpetrator creates powerful mechanisms of psychological compartmentalization. He literally rewrites his internal history, burying memories of the victim so deep in his subconscious that over time he himself begins to genuinely believe in his innocence or that the past is forever in the past. This monstrous dissonance between the sadist from 1973 and the peaceful, friendly old man from 2019 shows us a bitter truth. Evil does not always look like a growling monster from cheap horror movies. Often it adapts perfectly, mimics absolute normality, and ages right alongside us, perfectly hiding behind the harmless smile of the grandpa living right next door. But let's look at this story from another angle, from the perspective of the parents, who had to learn to breathe again for decades after losing what was most precious to them, never knowing the truth. The guilt of Barbara, who refused to pick her daughter up from school, is a destructive mechanism of self-flagellation that clinical psychologists call the locus of hypercontrol. In moments of grief, our brain desperately searches for the cause of the tragedy in our own actions, trying to convince us that we could have prevented the inevitable if we had acted differently. It is scientifically proven that evolutionarily the human psyche finds it easier to feel guilt than to admit absolute helplessness in the face of random evil. In clinical practice, such conditions are classified as prolonged grief disorder. Real psychotherapists work with such parents for years using cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and the EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing method. The main goal of these therapies is to break the faulty neural connection in the patient's brain between an ordinary everyday decision, not picking someone up from school, and a horrific outcome. To survive such a loss and not lose one's mind, it is incredibly important to work through this trauma with a specialist, realizing one undeniable truth: the blame for a crime always lies solely with the criminal, not with those who made routine decisions. The death of the parents before the killer's capture adds a heavy existential burden to this case. Grief cannot be forgotten, but people try to learn to live with it, transforming the pain into a bright memory and finding new pillars of support. From a psychological standpoint, the resilience of law enforcement officers and detectives who carry the weight of these unsolved cold cases for decades is also scientifically astounding. In the professional environment, this phenomenon is called secondary traumatic stress and compassion fatigue. Investigators working on cold cases face severe emotional burnout. They see the faces of victims in their sleep, carry their stories throughout their entire careers, feeling a personal, almost paternal responsibility to restore justice, especially to deceased parents. To protect their psyche, they build strong emotional shields, but an unsolved case forms what is known as ambiguous loss, a situation where the brain cannot close the gestalt. This is why catching a criminal almost half a century later is not just a closed file in the archives for them. It is a profound catharsis, a therapeutic healing of professional cognitive dissonance, proving that their hard work has the highest value. We are used to thinking that time heals wounds and erases traces, but this stunning story proves the exact opposite. Science and time are now playing on the side of justice. The tragedy of the O'Keefe family, who never learned the truth in their lifetimes, breaks the heart. But the realization that new genetic technologies can reach criminals even in deep old age gives tremendous, bright hope to thousands of other families. Our main goal in the Victim Path project is not just to talk about the darkest side of human nature, but to prove that retribution, even if delayed for decades, is absolutely inevitable. Never forget what might be hiding behind the perfect facade of an ordinary life, and always listen to your inner instincts. If this episode made you think about the power of modern technology, the pain of parents, and the inevitability of punishment, write the code word DNA in the comments so we can see our most attentive and loyal viewers. Take care of yourselves, be careful, and see you in the next investigation.